There, this is Tech Chick, and I'm back with another tech tip. And this week we're going to use the frequency table to create another column in our orders spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Now, in our last video, we created a frequency table using the low amount and high amount, basically using the bin array here with the upper limits to create customer tiers. So the customer tiers are based on how much the customer's order amounts were for. So, for example, if the order amount was from $0 to $499.99, they had a silver customer tier. And if the amount was from 2000 to 200 or $2,999.99, and they had a gold, and you could see the ranges here. So based on these ranges in the table determines the customer tier here. So if we look at the first one, Anakin Skywalker ordered $1,543.92 worth of stuff. And so he should get the bronze tier. But in our frequency table, it doesn't tell us which customers are in each of these customer tiers. It only tells us how many customers are in those tiers. So with this example, we're going to create a new column called customer tier. And in this example, we're going to use a switch statement. So the switch statement is like an embedded if-else statement in programming. It's something that you can use in Excel. What the switch statement allows you to do is say, for example, in our example, we're going to say, if our order amount is between 0 and $499.99, then return the value silver. If the value, this value here, D2, is between $500 and $1,999.99, return the bronze level tier. If the amount is $2,000 to $2,999.99, then return the gold. If the order amount is between $3,000 and $3,999.99, return the platinum. And if the value is between 4,000 and 5,000, return titanium. And then if you remember from my last video or when we created the frequency table, it creates an extra bucket. So any order amounts that are greater than 5,000 are less than 0, which would be hard to do unless you owed the customer a return maybe, but those wouldn't be shown here. Then those would be counted in this default bucket here. And as you can see, that count there is 0. So we shouldn't have any customers that are outside of any of these ranges. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to click in F2 and we're going to say equals. We're going to start with equals and we're going to type the switch because we're going to use the switch statement, our formula, I should say. And now you never would guess this by looking at it, but what we want to do is start with true, the value true. And I don't know why, but I think what it's saying is if your expression is true, if your value is true, then return the result. So hopefully that makes sense. But if not, it will in this example. So what we're going to do for our first value here It's weird how it just populates that. Oops, sorry. Let me go back here and get rid of this. So let me get rid of this completely, and we're going to start over here. All right. Okay, so now we're going to say equals switch. Our first value is true because what we're saying is if the expression that we provide is true, then return our value. So the first expression that we're going to look at is our order value. If our order value is less than or equal to this value here, oops, I should put a space in here, then we want to return silver. And I'm just going to use these values because they're already here in our formula. And then we're going to say if D2 is less than or equal to this next value, then we're going to return this value. And if our order amount in D2 is less than or equal to this value, then return this value. And if our order amount in D2 is less than or equal to this value, then return this value. And I'm too lazy to type all this out. So I'm just using the values that are already provided on our spreadsheet here to make it easier. And then the last case is if our D2 order amount is less than or equal to this amount, comma, return this amount. And then by default, we want to say if our value doesn't fall in any of these brackets or none of these expressions are true, this is our ultimate else statement. So a switch statement is basically an embedded if else statement. If you're familiar with that because you do programming, then you'll know the if part is your expression here. If this expression is true, return this. And it's this whole switch statement is a bunch of if statements basically. So we're saying if this is true, return this. 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 Else, if none of them are true, then we're just going to return titanium. So that's our formula. And I think personally a switch statement is more convenient and provides some short circuiting in programming because with a switch statement, if this is true, it will return that value and it should end. If it's not true, it will go on to the next expression. So I think it's more convenient than an embedded if statement. It's easier to read, in my opinion, and it makes it easier for visibility's sake. So let's see if first of all, let's see if our expression works. But there's a problem with our equation, and I think I've mentioned this probably multiple times in the Excel videos that I've created videos on. So let me just see if this returns. Okay, so this definitely returned what we wanted it to return, right? The value's $1,543.92. And that is a bronze level because it's between $500 and $1,999.99. So that's true. But what we're going to do is we're going to copy this and we're going to paste. So we're going to click in the next cell below, hold down Shift Control and click the down key. Oh, Nope, I keep forgetting that doesn't work with this. So you gotta hold this, and we're gonna scroll down to the end of our data and go all the way down to the end and just click shift. Click, hold down the shift key and click your right mouse button. And now we're gonna right click and select formula because we want to paste the formula. And I have a feeling I did this wrong. Nope, I did it right, but it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is so you noticed it worked a couple of times, a couple of first times it worked. Um, and that's because it's changing. If you look, it's changing our references. So instead of looking at J4 here, it's looking at J5. And luckily, our value, and this is wrong, right? It should have returned silver, not bronze. But because it's using J5 as the limit, that's why it returned bronze. And same with here. You can see the values keep increasing. And that's because in our original formula, we didn't use absolute values. So in order for these values here, the only thing we don't, or the only thing we do want to change when we copy the function into the other cells is the D2 value. We want D2 to go to D3, to go to D4, because when we copy that formula into these other cells, we want to look at the D3 value. In this line, we want to look at D4 and so on. So, but the problem is we don't want the other values to change. So in order to fix that, we need to make these absolute values. And I think everybody's probably heard enough about the absolute values that I don't have to show you the devastating results of those going forward. So we'll fix these all. I know there's got to be a shortcut for making these absolute. It seems like there should be an easier way of doing this. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and Google it on my other screen. Maybe ChatGPT will have an answer for us. Let's look at Google real quick. Is there a shortcut for making Excel values absolute? Okay, yes, there's a shortcut for making cell references absolute. Wow, it's the F4 key. All right, so let's try the F4 key. So we're going to click on here and we're going to try F4. The problem is I don't know if it just makes that first one. Oh, no, makes the whole thing. Wow, I love that. So you click in the front of the cell reference and you just click F4. I absolutely love that. So going forward, we're going to use F4 to make our cell references absolute cell references. Now, let's make sure this works. And it did, right? We got the correct value. It should be bronze. So now we're going to copy this formula. And then we're going to go scroll all the way down. Hold down the shift key and click in that bottom value there. And you're going to left click in that bottom value. I think before I said right click, but it's left click in there to highlight all the rest of the cells. And then we're going to right click and choose paste formula. Let's make sure this is working now. Is that gold? Yep. And as you can see, it works now. Every single customer tier is labeled correctly. And that's what we wanted. And now that we have that shortcut, for making the cells absolute references. I will definitely be doing that in the future. F4 is our friend for making cell references absolute cell references. So when you don't want them to change, and we don't want those to change because they're fixed on our spreadsheet in that location. So they're an absolute value. That means their location isn't going to change. But what is going to change is the value that we're comparing it against. So the value that we're using to compare to these fixed values here is going to change. So that's a relative value, right? Because it's going to change. So we create a new customer tier, and we now know not just the counts of all our silver, bronze, gold, platinum, and titanium customer tiers, or how many customers are in those tiers, but we now know which customers are in those tiers thanks to the switch statement. And I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you like these videos, please subscribe.